All right, so I'm pre-recording about half an hour of lecture because I have a meeting until 11 a.m. So for those of you who want to attend the lecture in the synchronous mode, I do apologize that I will be missing the first half hour or so. But you can watch this part, for the first half hour, and write down any questions, and you can even write down the questions in the text channel on Discord. So this way, when I'm ready to join the class, live or in the synchronous mode, I will go back to the text channel and look for any messages or any questions at that point. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to increase the mic gain a little bit, so this way I don't have to speak as loud. There we go. So I'm putting the mic here back at 100%, and I can still see the mic is still doing okay. I'm not clipping the volume at this point. Okay, so that's good. All right, so what you're seeing here is the exam from last spring, or basically it's the last semester. So for the most part, the instructions are going to be a little bit different because our test is fully online instead of being in a classroom. So it is still open book and open notes. Pretty much open any material that is printed or handwritten, prior to the exam. But this part also is a little bit tricky, because when I refer to prior to the exam in a face-to-face setting, there's only one time slot, okay? And so for the online test, it has to be prior to, either it is your own stuff, okay? So your own handwriting or your own, material, then you can do it anytime you want, okay? But if it is a shared material that you want to share with another person, then it has to be done before the first time slot of the entire day, okay? All right, because the whole point is, the score, whatever score you're getting should reflect the competency of yourself, and without any prior knowledge of the exam questions, and using only the resources that are allocated to you. So if you need extra time because of DSPS qualifications, then you let me know, and I think some of you have already let me know about that, and I will provide accommodations based on that. All right, so let's move on to the questions. I will share the document in just a little bit, so this way you guys can actually gain access to the document itself. All right, so question 1 of 5. Part 1 says, define a set W such that each element of W is a digit of your student ID, and W bar is 3 is true, and there may be many ways to define such a set depending on your student ID, and if that is the case, just pick one. Okay, so that's part 1. So the answer to part 1 is basically a set, and I want you to complete the notation of this particular set. All right, so let me show you what answers you can expect in this case. I will just use a text editor in this case. So in your case, okay, because it is not a paper-based exam, so what you do is you have a Google document that I will provide to you with questions that are specific to you, and then you write your answer or type your answer to be more exact in the same document. Now, if you say, I don't like to type, I like to handwrite, that is okay as well. Okay, so what you do is you would handwrite on a piece of paper, and then you scan that piece of paper and then paste that paper, or the scan of that paper into the exam itself. So that would be okay as well. Okay, it's just I would prefer that people just kind of type the answers into the document. All right, so getting back to here, part 1. So part 1, is W equals 2. So in this case, in my case, my ID is 0006887. So 6, 8, and 7 would be okay. Now, if somebody gives me something like this, okay, 6067, I will take points off because it is lacking the braces. If somebody gives me something like this, I would definitely take points off, and this one is going to be even more points taken off because a set cannot have duplicate items. If someone gives me some answer like this, major points would be taken off because there are not 3 elements. So bar W bar being 3 is not true in this case. So the way I grade is based on whether I think a mistake is a conceptual mistake or whether it's just a not so conceptual mistake. There's part 2. So part 2 defines x to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way up to 9. Define y such that y is a subset of x is true. W, which refers to part 1, union y is 5, or the cardinality of that union is 5, and the intersection of that is going to be 1. So these are the constraints to find y. So the first one is simply saying y has to be a set of digits from 0 to 9. The second one says when you union, we need to have 2 more things in the union. And then the third one says when you look at the intersection, there should be only one element that is common between W and Y. Okay, so we can now say, okay, so let's just say that W is what I have originally. Okay, before I started to talk about the incorrect answers. So in this case, if I make Y also have 3 elements, but this time I want these 3 elements such that one is common and the other one are different. Okay, so we'll look at it this way. So when we look at the union of these, then we get 0, 1, 2, 6, 7 as the elements of the union. When we look at the intersection, we only get 0 in the intersection set. So that would meet the union, cardinality of the union and cardinality of the intersection requirements. It would also meet the requirement that y is a subset of x, because y in this case only has 3 of the elements of x. So it is definitely a subset, and even more, I can say that this is a proper subset. But the question only asked it has to be a subset. All right, so let's move on to part 3. So in part 3, I want you to answer the following question. So we want to look at what is W minus Y. So W minus Y in this case would be a set of all the elements that are found in W but not in Y. So when you look at W, it has got 0, 6, 7, and we want things that are not found in Y. So the only thing that is common that is found in Y in this case is the 0. So that means the W minus Y would only have 6 and 7 because those 2 are found only in W but not in Y. And then we move on to Y minus W. Okay, so Y minus W would be the elements that are only found in Y but not in W. So in this case, 1 and 2 are the elements that are found in Y but not found in W. The third part asks, what is the value V such that blah 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 is true? So the blah 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 says it is not the case that V is an element of the union between W and Y. Okay, so we want to, and there are many answers to this one. So we want to look at what is W union Y. So W union Y would be 0, 1, 2, 6, 7. So there are 5 elements in that particular union. So you can pick anything that is not in that union. Okay, so you can say V equals 3 would work, right? Because 3 is not part of the union of W and Y. But you can actually or V equals to Thomas. Okay, that will also work. But you would say, but Thomas is not even a part of X. Well, there's no requirement that V has to be found in X in this case. So so that means you have really a lot of options, because just about anything other than 0, 1, 2, 6, 7 will work in this case. And then the last part of part 3 is asking, what is the value V such that V is in the intersection of W intersecting with Y is true? Well, that we only got one answer in this case. Okay, V has to be 0 in this case, based on the way I have defined W and Y. So obviously for questions like this, I'm expecting different people's answer to be at least slightly different, unless two people have the same kind of digits in their student ID and by coincidence they also choose to use the same digits. But there are a lot of choices here, right? Because there are choices based on the person's own student ID, and then the choices from 0 to 9, and each one has many possible choices. So if there are two people picking the same exact choices, then I will go ahead and calculate the probabilities, and if the probability looks really slim, then I would definitely get my attention. Let's just put it that way. All right, so that is one question. I'm looking at the clock because I want to make sure that I get this recorded on time, get it uploaded, and also get to the meeting on time as well. All right, so let's move on to question number 2 of 5. Okay, so this one also has multiple parts. So the proportion of each part is not published. In other words, how many points is to part 1, part 2, and part 3, they are not published. But we know that there are only 5 questions and all questions have the same weight. So if you want to look at the entire exam as quote-unquote 20% of all the scores, or the points of the entire semester, then you can sort of look at each question as 4%. But we just know that they're between the questions, they're evenly distributed, but within the question, the parts may or may not be evenly distributed. So there's no assumption that you can make about that. All right, so part 1 says define a set W such that each element of W is a digit of your student ID, and all digits of your student ID are elements of W. Okay. So tax student ID is 0006887. Okay, so we want to meet all of these requirements. So each element of W is a digit of my student ID. So that means the only digits eligible for this particular set as members of this set would be 0, 6, 8, and 7. Oh, by the way, this is supposed to be an 8. But we also want to make sure that we meet the second requirement. All digits of my student ID are elements of W. So in this case, I really don't have a choice. W has to be 0, 6, 7, 8. Okay. If I put 1 into it, that would be wrong because 1 is not in my student ID. If I put 0 twice, that would be wrong because my student ID, because you cannot have duplicate items in a set. If I do not put a 0 into this set, that would be wrong as well because the second statement here says all digits of my student ID are elements of W. So that means the 0 has to be a member of this particular set. Part 2 says evaluate the expression. Okay, so let's show the expression first. And I think I can just move this up. So this way we can see the entire question like that. All right, evaluate the expression. There exists E in W such that E mod 2 is 0. Okay, so we want to know whether that statement, we want to find the value of this particular statement. Okay, so in this case, if you're typing, you can just go ahead and type whatever the answer is here, which is either true or false. Okay. And in this case, the answer would be true. The answer would be true because this is an existential quantifier, which means if there's at least one element in W, E, meeting this requirement, that makes the entire that makes the entire quantified expression true. So the answer is true, and the explanation, because, is going to be 0 is in W, and 0 mod 2 does equal to 0. Okay, that's basically a legitimate answer to this particular question. And then we move on to part 3, which says evaluate the expression for all E in W. E is less than 8. Okay, so once again we want to know whether that is true or false. In this case, the answer is false. The answer is false because 8 is in W, and 8 is less than 8 is false. Okay, because in order for a universal quantifier to be true, you need the expression to be true for everything that the quantifier applies to. So in this case, because 8 is an element of W and yet 8 is not less than 8, so that means the test is failing on at least one of the elements of the set, and as a result the universal quantifier is false. So these are the answers to those to that particular question. And now we move on to question number 3 of 5. Okay, so question number 3 of 5, is a question about functions. And in this case, part 1 says, define a set W such that each element of W is a digit of your student ID, and W bar is 3 is true, and there may be many ways to define such a set. Just pick one. Okay, so let me just pick W being, okay, let's pick, I don't really have a whole lot of choices because I have only 4 unique digits in my ID. Because I got 3 zeros and 2 8s, okay, so that takes up a lot of duplication. Let's just say it takes up a lot of positions. So in the case that somebody actually has an ID that has less than 3 unique digits, that person can contact me. I would typically test first, okay, because I know all of your IDs, and make sure that it is okay with everybody. Okay, so in this case, I pick W to be slightly different from before. Okay, so I'm going to choose 6, 8, 7 as my as W. So that's kind of part 1. So part 2 is the more complicated one, and you can probably expect part 2 to carry more points, because part 2 says define Y such that 1, 8 is a subset of Y. Okay, so that means actually I had a typo here. Oh yeah, this is actually correct. So 1, 8 is a subset of Y, which means Y must contain 1 and 8. Okay, so that's one requirement or one constraint of this question. And then we want to define the function f. So now you have to remember what a function is, because f has to be a function first, then meet the extra requirement. So define the function f where W is the domain and Y is the codomain as a set for each of the following constraints. If you think a constraint is impossible, then you want to tell me why it is not possible. Okay, so let's look at each one. Okay, so we want injective, not injective. Okay, so we want not injective and not surjective. There we go. So in this case, we want it to be non-unique. In other words, elements of f map to non-unique elements of y. And we also want it to be not surjective. In other words, we want something in y not to be used. And we also want to make sure that 1, 8 are both found in y, because the set 1, 8 is a subset of y. So this one is, well, actually fairly easy. Okay, so f as a set, okay, must contain 6 something, 8 something, and also 7 something. Okay, because in order for this to be a function, each element of the domain has to map to one and only one thing in the codomain. And we also know that y in this case must consist 1 and 8 in the set. Okay, now it may contain extra stuff, but we'll see whether we need any extra stuff or not. So one really quick and easy way to get this done is like that. Okay, so every single element in the domain is going to map to the same element in the codomain, which is 1 in this case, but we got one extra thing in y in the codomain, which is 8, that is not mapped to. So this will meet both the requirement of not injective and not surjective. The next one is injective and not surjective. Okay, so that one is relatively easy to meet as well. So we want this to be injective. Okay, so I'm just being lazy here and copy and paste, so I don't have to deal with the formatting. So in this case, what we do is we want to make sure that everything in the domain maps to a unique thing in the codomain. So 1 is used up here, so I cannot use it again. I'm going to use 8 over here. So now the 1 and 8 are used up. We have to map the third one to something that is different. Okay, so we can pick anything other than 1 and 8. Okay, it doesn't even have to be a digit. Okay, but no, let me just make it a digit. It's easier. So we'll make this 2. But that means 2 has to be found in y now. So now we have to change y to be 1, 8, and 2. But that is not enough, because this will make f injective, but it is also surjective because we have used up everything in the codomain. So that means we have to add one more thing in the codomain that is not mapped to. Well, I guess 3 will work, right? There we go. All right, so the next one is injective and not injective, sorry. Okay, not injective and surjective. There we go. All right, so just copy the format first and then work out the details later. So this one, we don't want it to be injective, but we do want it to be surjective. Then you might go like, oh, maybe the first, this will work, okay? No, it doesn't work, because if I were to do it like this, okay, and get rid of the 2 and the 3 down here, this will make it not injective for sure, because domain elements in the domain are mapped to the same thing in the codomain. So it's definitely not injective, meeting the first requirement. But it is also not surjective, but we want this one to be surjective. Then someone may say, we can just get rid of the 8. That won't work either, because we need 1, 8 as a subset of y, so we cannot remove that. So one solution to solve this problem is to make one of them map to 8 and add one more element in the codomain, let's say 2. So now we have something that is, oh, we want it to be surjective. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so this will make it not injective, because we have 2 elements in the domain mapping to the same element in the codomain, but it is also at the same time surjective, because all the elements in the codomain are mapped to. And here is the last one. Okay, we want f to be bijective, which means it is both injective and surjective. So okay, once again, I'm just going to copy the format first, and then we'll work on it. So we'll make, first of all, to make it bijective, it has to be injective and surjective. So that means every element in the domain has to map to a unique thing in the codomain. So we're going to have to change this one, because we cannot have 2 elements in the domain mapped to 1. So we'll make one map to a 2 down here. But that means this 2 has to be a part of the codomain, so we have to add 2 as an element of the codomain. So this will make f both injective and also surjective, because every element in the domain is mapped to a unique element in the codomain, and at the same time we have every element in the codomain mapped to. So that will meet all of the requirements. All right. So I am going to stop the recording at this point, because it is, I know it's not quite half an hour, but I'm pretty sure some of you already have some questions about these 3. And I am going to also link the document in Discord. So this way, if you have no questions about 1, 2, and 3, you can move on to 4 and 5 by yourself. And then I'll join you at 11 o'clock and talk about those 2, the question 4 and question 5 in synchronous mode. But if you have questions already about questions 1, 2, or 3, then you might want to put your questions into today's text channel. So this way, when I join the class, in synchronous mode, I would go through those questions first before I move on to talk about question 4 and 5. All right, so I will go ahead and upload the video first, and then link the test itself in Discord. And then I'll move on to my meeting, and I'll see you guys at 11 o'clock. All right.